Thank you, Andrew. Yeah, thanks for having me. This is kind of interesting because I used to do these talks up and down the country for humanist groups years and years ago, like pre-COVID, and it was quite a nice way of knowing kind of the Humanist UK membership. Always quite fun to see bits of the UK you didn't know existed. I think the best one that I did was in Wales. They were a really friendly bunch, and there was a old lady that came to me afterwards she said something like she was in her 80s, mid 80s, and she said, I know you help young people, but do you help people my age? Because she was from a Christian background, and she was worried that every time her grandson called her because he wanted her to return to the faith, she was worried that he would stop calling her because she was actually a humanist. So these issues affect kind of really people from all sorts of backgrounds. Yeah, so a little bit of background. So I'm Imtiaz Shams. I grew up from quite a religious Muslim sort of background. I'm British. I was born here, but I spent 10 years in Saudi Arabia, a city called Riyadh. And kind of in Saudi Arabia, everything is, theology and theocracy is the norm. So in a way, religion doesn't play such a overt relationship in your life as it actually did for me here. So when I moved from Saudi Arabia to the UK, that's when religion became a lot more sort of, I guess, tied to my identity. Because when something is part of the natural fabric, you don't think about it in the same way as when something is a bit more it fills a gap with your identity, which is what was the case here. But I'll just go back in time a little bit. So I grew up in Saudi Arabia. My family are sort of religious Muslims. As was I was raised up quite religious, and it was also personal. So people are often religious because they were raised up in it, but you also sometimes take ownership of your identity, and I think that's something that was important to me. And so when I came to the UK and started growing up here, you started to assign more and more meaning to what you're understanding about the whole world through the lens of religion. So the more religious you are, the more it tries to tell you, use this lens, you have this lens, this is Islam in my case, and everything you do when you see the world is through the lens of Islam, whether it's what was happening at the time with foreign policy stuff. I remember when we were young, we'd pray for like Chechnya, then it became Iraq, Afghanistan. All of these things that are happening fit perfectly within that sphere of Islam. And then you've got things more locally. So, I grew up in London, in East London, but closer towards Hainault and Romford. It's more sort of Essexy. And there actually wasn't any Muslims in my school at the time, or not really. And I remember, seeing a lot of deprivation in my area, and again, assigning that to, this is what Islam is trying to protect us from, and sort of hedonism and all that kind of stuff, all that good stuff, basically. So for me growing up, there was no question that Islam was obviously correct, because it was saying all these things about the world that were reflected back through what I was seeing as reality. The other interesting one was science. So I was always very, very into science. I loved kind of understanding how things were made in factories. There's a program called How It's Made. I watched it since I was a child, kind of obsessively, to be honest. I was top marks in science, usually. It was my favorite subject. And even now I work in technology. So serial entrepreneur means sort of we have businesses in robotics, agricultural technology, photonics, things like that. All science stuff, basically, where I don't do any of the science. I have engineers, but I love it. So then you wonder, well, why didn't the science kind of pull me away from Islam? It's because it did the opposite. Because at the time in particular, there was a lot of language and books about how science can prove Islam. And this came off a lot of what you saw in Christian apologism at the time. This is probably in the 2000s, and so the 90s to the 2000s and 2010s. So I would read all these books that would say, look, the Quran talks about embryology and predicts what we would find in science thousands of years later, or the Quran says this and that. And so again, Islam was reflecting the world. So that was all happening. And so I had no questions and no doubts about Islam, except you do. Of course you do, since you're a child. Everyone has doubts about what system they grew up in, whether it's, if you grew up in communist Russia, you probably have questions. If you grew up in Islam, if you grew up humanist, if your family were humanist, you still question, right? That's how humans work. We love to find patterns, even when they are none, and even when there are patterns there. So I had questions my whole life, like all people, but the answers to the questions always existed. So I remember when I was very young, and I mean very young because I was in Saudi Arabia, and I remember this, and I had this book called Riyadh al-Salihin, which is quite a famous book in Islam. It's a compilation of hadith, like sayings of the Prophet. And I remember reading a bit in there about Aisha there, one of the wives of the prophets, one of the most beloved wives. In fact, I would always be very excited by her story. Like, she had some great stories about kind of things that happen and all that. But I remember reading about her basically playing with dolls and being quite young and being quite confused and going, wait a minute, I'm sort of that age. That doesn't make any sense. Because even as a kid, you know that oh, kids are kids and adults are adults. So the chronology of that didn't make sense, but I kind of didn't think about it when I was at that age. And I remember that question came up a few times. And as you get older, the apologism also starts to grow. There's lots of answers for that. Well, Aisha wasn't actually that age. She was 18, or she was young, but women matured a lot quicker back in the day. Oh, there's lots and lots of that. Now multiply that by every single question you have about the religion. Like, whatever questions I had, there was always dense apologism about it. So, and that included the science stuff. I remember sometimes the science things didn't quite make sense, like evolution was a big one. You know, even the Islamic science books went away from saying all evolution is bad to sometimes saying, oh, well, what about microevolution? That's probably real, but macroevolution we don't believe in. It's very similar to what the Christians were saying in William Lane Craig and all that kind of stuff with evangelical Christianity. And I think these questions were there, and it was only when I got older and older in my brain, I think my brain just developed a bit more, and I just started going, something's wrong here, and I don't know what it is. And I initially didn't assign it to Islam. I assigned it to my community. I was like, something's wrong with the community I'm in. There's something just broken about some of this morality and some of this stuff. And I remember I kind of didn't know what that meant. So I just wanted to learn more about the world. And that's not, you know, there are things that are sort of quite theologically founded, and there's things that are kind of communal, and it's a little bit hard to separate them sometimes. One of the things is that, you know, in my specific type of community, we're quite closed in some ways. We don't really let young people do, you know, things beyond what they should be doing, like traveling by yourself or all that kind of stuff, especially if you're a girl. But in my case, even as a boy, I was raised up quite conservative in that way. But I just decided I needed to see more about the world and, you know, do that. It caused a lot of problems, as you can imagine. I was basically kind of had to do all of that traveling and mind opening, I guess, by myself. But it was the best time of my life. As hard as it was, I remember just thinking, I feel so free. And I feel like I'm like hungry to learn. Like, imagine I was already quite I swallow information since I was a kid, but this is like you give water to a camel, right? I was just like everything. I was just like trying to see as much about the world. And you'd think that that kept me away from Islam, but actually what was happening is I knew that I was doing things that I shouldn't necessarily be doing. Like, you know, I'd be like having relationships and partying and things like that. But I also knew that was not where I wanted to be. I needed to find sort of true Islam. But I knew that true Islam couldn't be found in my upbringing, because some of those things I couldn't agree with, like how it treated sort of gay people. You know, I remember thinking there was two kids in my class, these two kind of kids from Hainault, and they were quite sort of camp, they were quite feminine, and they get bullied massively. And I hate bullies since I was a kid, and I would work with them, and like not work with them, but I would be against the bullies, but I was also getting bullied, so I wouldn't be able to help that much. But I remember hating that they were bullied and called, you know, fag and things like this. When I got older, I found out that they were actually gay. And I remember thinking, if I think for 1 second there's something wrong with them, you know, even religiously, you can say, but they were made by God this way, but they shouldn't take action. It's a test. But I remember thinking that just sounds bullshit. That just sounds like I'm another bully. So I kind of squirreled that in my mind, if that makes sense. Like the many other questions that I had, and I just forgot about it. But I never did. It was always there. And I remember at some point I thought, okay, I need to find Islam, because like clearly this is this life that I've figured and seen the world and stuff. Yeah, but this is not Islam, and I need to figure out Islam. And I remember really going back to the books and back to the basics. And that was a problem, because unlike a lot of Muslims that I grew up with, I really, really was interested in theology since I was a kid. So I already had a pretty decent foundation of that. But I had now also seen more of the world. I'd studied a bit of social science. So you start, your brain just doesn't process things the same way. And I couldn't fathom that Islam is right, but I also couldn't fathom a world without Islam. And that was, I was at university at the time. I think I was just coming out of university, actually. And I remember thinking, like, what does that mean? Like, who the bleep am I then? Like, what does that mean? And the best way I can describe it is, imagine Andrew or Anna, whoever is on the call, you're a human your whole life, and then suddenly someone comes down and says, actually, you've been raised within humans, you're actually an alien from Alpha Centauri or something, and you're now coming back to your planet. Like, you'd be like, wait, what is even going, like, that's the best way I can describe, is that I really felt like an alien in my own skin, and that the whole world structure that you have, that lens of Islam was broken, but it can't be broken because it's the only thing that's true, right? So you get stuck. That was a really difficult moment for me. It's like, I think my brain snapshotted like what I was thinking at the time, because I've always remembered this. I was trying to remember how I feel at that moment, and it felt like everything was black. Like I was black. You know, like in the movie, you see someone. It's so cheesy. It's like you see someone in a dark room. They have no sense. It's not blackness of visibility of light. It's blackness of all senses. And you can do this, but there's no feelings. There's nothing. There's that kind of darkness. And I remember just thinking, what the fuck does this mean about my life? Like, what does that mean? But I just knew I couldn't be Muslim anymore, because Islam wasn't true. I really loved truth. That's why I love science. That's why, and you learn that truth is a complicated beast, and as you grow older and all that. But that was very difficult, because I don't really have anyone. I obviously couldn't tell my family. I thought from the 1.7 billion Muslims in the world, I was the only one that had left. I genuinely thought that, because you never learn about anyone leaving ever in your community like that. Then I started to go online. That's kind of always where I went. And I was on a place called Reddit, and I started seeing there was a thing called Reddit ex-Muslim, and there was literally, I think, hundreds of people there at the time. Now that subreddit has about 110,000 people, but at the time it was literally hundreds. I remember meeting, like coming across other people telling their stories, and I was like, oh my God, this is like my story. This is very similar. Some people were more religious or less religious, or they had issues with being women or gay or whatever. But so there was differences, but I just remember going, oh my God, these are other people like me. And, but they're all online, anonymous, completely anonymous, all that kind of stuff. So, but I don't know, I've always been kind of a people-y person. Like that time I went to travel the world, the thing I had to learn is how to interact with people who are outside, who are outsiders and not from my in-group. So I kind of started to think, okay, I'm going to meet people from this subreddit. So I posted that I would like to meet people, which was, I mean, even for me at the time, it was a bit ballsy, because like I genuinely thought I'd get murdered. So I remember it was so funny. My friend, who's still a very close friend of mine, Jessica, was it Jessica? I can't remember. It was one of my close friends from LSE. I think it was Jessica. I said to them, no, actually it wasn't Jessica, it was someone else. But I told them to come and meet me at King's Cross Station, because I was going to meet this one guy off the internet who was an ex-Muslim. This guy probably was, like, I had no idea if they were real or whatever. And I said to her, can you go sit in that cafe that he's in and just have a look and tell me if this guy looks legit, if there's someone there, because I was shitting my pants. And she did that, and she was like, yeah, he's fine. Like, there's someone there, he looks like this. So I went and met this guy, and this kid was shitting his pants just as much as I was, like, so nervous. And as soon as we started talking, it was like I'd met a family member, I had never met him, and I immediately felt this is my family. Because it was our dirty little secret. He had never told anyone in his whole life. I had never told. He was the first person I told in person like that. and we just word vomited on each other. It was amazing. I actually don't know where he is. I have to find maybe I'll find it in my phone, but I remember he came out twice. He actually told me he's bisexual as well at the time. So I remember clearly thinking, like, he's telling me two things, you know, and I felt so special and so powerful. And probably it was a way to feel power in my own situation as well. And then it was like I was like a crack addict. I just kept meeting people, like, constantly. In fact, if you go through my old Reddit account, you can just see, now it's been about 8 years, but like just me meeting people and, you know, all that kind of stuff. It then became kind of secret groups. So the London group was one of the biggest ones at the time. But I also helped set up the one in Australia. There was my friends in America that set it up. It's now a big charity there, like Ex-Muslim North America. And but it was all kind of underground. And what was really funny at the time was I was doing all of this. I was actually setting up events and all that kind of stuff, like big events, 50 people, which I know doesn't sound big, but for ex-Muslims, 50 people, considering every single person had to be vetted twice. So we had like a fight. I watched the movie Fight Club. And so we had this method where two people would physically vet you, and a third would be told about this person, and they would vet, and we'd have an admin group. So it was very Fight Club. You have to know someone who knows someone. And this is how the whole world did it. So even in Australia, we have the same rules. They did it slightly differently. The Midlands was set up as well with my friend and me, and we did it slightly differently there. The North was set up by some other people, and they did it completely differently. You know, America did it the same in the beginning, and then they changed it. But we were all in the closet. We were all secretive. And at the same time, I started to get a little bit of like media coverage for some of this work secretly. And we did a few media things. And I remember thinking, this is so ridiculous that I'm helping people come out to each other. And some of them are even telling their family. Some of them have come out. You know, I had one friend, he's still my friend now. He's had a child. He was out to his family, but it was still quite tricky for him. I remember thinking, and I'm in the closet, like I have not told my family, because my family are very, very religious. I didn't want to hurt them, you know, I didn't want to hurt my mom in particular. But so I started telling people who I'd went to uni with at the LSE who were in the Islamic Society, because I was quite a big member of the Islamic Society. Like I was quite involved in the Islamic Society, the ISOC. And I told 2 or 3 people there. One of them, they're all very, very shocked. One of them sort of said she didn't mind. But I think later she could never really be friends with me in the same way again. And the other 2 people said that they didn't mind, but it's the same thing. You know, you lose friendships, but you don't lose them because they tell you to F off. You lose them because they can't look at you in the same way, you know? So I told them. And then I told family members as well, because there was a documentary that I knew was going to come out in a year or so, whatever. And I had to tell my family. And then I kind of came out by accident, I guess, and it all hell broke loose and blah, 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 blah. It got really messy. But yeah, so I sort of was very public about it since then. And this is all pre-Faith to Faithless, by the way. So I'll tell you a little bit about Faith to Faithless. And then I think what I'll do is I'll start opening it up a little bit to like just to chat. I thought a preamble is quite useful. Now, Faith to Faithless happened because on Reddit, there's also other communities. There's ex-Mormon is a huge one. It's actually one of the biggest one for apostates right now. There's ex-Christian, of course, for mostly evangelicals from America. There's ex-Jehovah's Witnesses. They're quite big because JW churches are very, very controlling. And there's also ex-Jew, which tends to be more ex-ultra-Orthodox Hasidic people, because again, it's similarly quite controlling. So I knew about them, and I'd met a couple of people like that, just like in the world, but I hadn't really been involved that much in that kind of stuff. And I had one friend, and I started thinking about what an organization would look like, because I've always been like someone who's interested in building things. I mean, even now I build companies and sort of charities and things like that. But when I build things, it's because I'm like, there's an unfairness. There's something stupid, you know, like it's not because I think like I can do something or whatever. I just feel something's annoying. It's like, this is annoying. Why is it that I felt I was the only ex-Muslim on the planet where clearly I wasn't? So I started thinking in that direction to do some videos and stuff like that. I did some videos on YouTube myself, which sort of, to this day, I get people coming to me saying that it's helped them. But I wanted to build something, because you can't build change with one person. Institutions are a lot more powerful, and I think Humanist UK is a good example of that, right? And I was in the kitchen with my friend who is ex-Hasidic Jewish, And we started laughing because our parents were exactly the same. He had exactly the same mother as I did. Like the stories were the same. We just laughed. And I remember thinking, wow, like it's not about ex-Muslims really. It's about, this is a problem that's much broader than that. And that's kind of where Faith to Faithless was born. So we did sort of, initially we did some panels on ex-Muslims, but we then started pulling in other apostates. This was not a charity at the time. It was literally just just people hanging out at universities doing talks. We had a lot of issues early. I wasn't able to get societies to speak at because the societies would cancel us or whatever it is. But the atheist secularist humanist societies, which was under Humanist UK at the time, they really saved our ass. Like that's why we could get events and the spaces, sorry. And that really just kickstarted everything. And Faith to Faithless then became kind of an apostate organization. So we did talks with Jehovah's Witnesses, like on YouTube at the time, Jehovah's Witnesses, there was maybe a couple of people who would do videos for kind of not great quality, except for one or two. We were the first to do like 4 or 5 people sitting on a table and talking about the stories. That way you have a united front. And then we started mixing it up. So we'd have ex-Muslim, ex-Jehovah's Witness, like a joke, they go to a bar, that kind of thing. But the reason we did that was quite sneaky. It was because I was like, when we do ex-Muslim events, they say we're Islamophobic. When we do Hasidic Jewish events, they say, oh, it's the anti-Semites or whatever it is. I was like, but you put us all together and you start realizing this is a lot bigger than your religion, mate. This is about people. And that worked really well for us. So we had these events kind of became quite successful. I remember the first event that sold out, there was people sitting on the floors outside and AC Grayling was in the front. And I remember like he came and spoke to some of our, I didn't speak to him that day, but he spoke to some of our speakers and, I just felt shit, man, like something's happening now. And Humanist UK, I think I interacted with Andrew quite early on. And I didn't know what humanist was, which was really hilarious. This is sort of a slightly big secret, but I didn't have any clue what a humanist was. I obviously was a humanist just by my own inclination and thoughts. But, as it's often the case, you never know what a humanist is. And apostates really don't know what humanism is generally. I remember I needed the organization to kind of grow slightly, but I had built enough stuff like business. I was doing business stuff at the time as well. And I realized how hard it was. And I was like, all right, there's no way this is going to grow if it's under stuff that I'm doing with people. It's just not gonna. And I had a good chat with Andrew and we kind of decided that merger made sense. Humanist UK is fantastic resourcing and just professionalism more than anything. And Faith to Faithless being a trusted sort of brand and having the networks and I guess having people like me who had some more visions beyond what we were at the time, but not having the tools or the people ready to do it. And so that happened, and that was really great because it gave us some credibility in terms of not with the world, but with institutions like Humanist UK. If there's one thing they're good at, it's institution building, and it's kind of putting a little screwdriver in other institutions and stabbing them a little bit. They're really good at that. So that helped us get into like the police force to train them on apostasy and the governments, lots of stuff. And to the point where now it's very normal. Initially, it was quite hard for Humanist UK to get training courses in, and now it's, we're pretty good at it, I think, with Faith to Faithless. So I want to leave it at that, just in terms of, I know it's a bit open-ended, but the reason being, I think I find these things are a lot more interesting when you talk a bit more openly. I realize I haven't talked too much about Islam, and there's a reason. I do that on purpose usually. It's because it often comes up in questions anyways, so I sort of wait for that. Faith to Faithless at the moment is going better than I've ever seen it. It's a real institution. Like it's going to be there forever. If we all die, it's still there. And that's really kind of where we want to get it. It helps thousands of people. I mean, actually hundreds and hundreds of thousands if you count the videos. And we know that because you can look at the comments, but thousands of people directly are helped sort of every year. We have a few things that are being developed in like confidentiality, which are so world firsts happening over the next year in 2022. So I think 2022 is going to be the year of the apostate, hopefully. We're going to do some really big things. And I'm not so involved in Faith to Faithless anymore. I'm on strategy side. I'm really just busy with my work and my sort of later charity that I did. But it's so beautiful just to see how much energy is underneath it. And it's the energy of apostates who are all feeling, when they start off with, it's hurt, but you turn that hurt into hope, and you turn that hope into action, and we're just constantly seeing that now. So Yeah, I'll take some questions, and we'll just have a quick conversation now, maybe.
That's great. Thanks very much, Imtiaz. Yeah, really interesting to get a personal account, which is rare. I mean, but not so rare now with you around. Well, anyway, so if you want to speak, so few of us, just turn your mic off and fire away. I've got loads of questions, but I don't want to hog it. I'll be back in a couple of minutes.
In the meanwhile, if anyone has a question, feel free. I can keep rambling on if you want, but I'd rather take questions. Yep, Viv, you don't have to put your hand up, I think.
Righto.
Thank you.
Well, fascinating. Let me just give you a little background of me. It's a pity Andrew isn't there because he doesn't know this either. But I was brought up in Church of England. My parents had been Baptist before. I then decided I was marrying a Catholic.
Right.
And it would be easier if I became Catholic. So the priest I went to for a conversion wasn't able to answer the question of transubstantiation. I said, well, let's give this substance a nickname. Let's call it, it's got a chemical formula. Let's give it a nickname. Let's call it bread. I'm eating it. Is it changing the chemical formula? Well, no. I'm swallowing it. Is it changing the chemical formula? No. Yes. No. Yes. No. I can't answer your question. Come back next week. And after a week, they couldn't answer my question. So that was interesting. But then as time goes on and you see the problems that the world is facing, often because of people's following a religion, it sort of makes me think that I'm no longer believing, if you like, that there is what I've been brought up to understand. And I have a very good friend who, if I told you who it was, you would recognize him and the company, but he's a very good engineer. So he was saying to me just recently, well, I'm an engineer. I believe in process because everything is a process. And from the Big Bang right the way through, I can see there has been a process, and that process is continuing. Now, when people can't understand something, they tend to describe it as God. But in my view, this is a process which is continuing and will going on continuing. If you want me to call that God or some form of religion, I can understand that because I believe in a process. I can't believe in a creative force, as it's sometimes put. And I think to myself, well, there really can't be a creator, because if anybody was to create the world we've got, they surely wouldn't have created it so cruel. I mean, for example, 99.9% of all creatures on this planet meet their end by being eaten alive. No creator would create that in that way. It was just so awful. So those are my thoughts that have brought me to thinking very much along the lines that you've been talking of tonight.
No, thank you for sharing that. I remember I remember the problem of evil was quite a big one for me. And I think the problem of evil is a very natural question people ask because you hear it time and time again. I remember for me, like I never really studied philosophy. It was very similar. I remember because I'm half, like my mom's side and my dad's side, they're from Bangladesh mostly. And we would go there every year, like constantly from Saudi Arabia. And we'd see in Bangladesh, there's often beggar kids who have no arms and legs sometimes. And there's often stories that they actually get them chopped off by gangs and things like that. I'm not sure how true that is in that case, but there's one kid in particular that didn't have arms and legs and would be begging and saying Allah, Allah, Allah. It's how they beg. And I remember kind of asking my mom, like, why, like kind of asking why, like, why this, right? And I remember my mom saying, you know, we have to take care of these people, which is, I think, a quite kind thing to say. But I just remember thinking that doesn't make any sense. Why is this kid like this? Now, you can always say, well, humans do evil. right? So maybe we're the cause of it. But a child getting eye cancer, or as you were saying, like most animals, well, almost all animals pass away through pain. It just didn't make any sense. Like, why a child getting cancer, that is directly an act of God, right? So okay, what is it? Is it a test? Well, that's the worst. You know, there's that saying, isn't there? I can't remember. It's like, if God can't do something about that, then he's powerless, and if he did, then I have a better morality than God. You know, so I remember that was a big one for me. There's in Islam, we have lots of solutions to that still, but none of them really feel good. You know, heaven and hell feels like a way for us to feel like we're outsourcing it to another time and space, right? Yeah, and it's quite interesting, transubstantiation. Like, it's one thing that we learn a lot growing up Muslim is that Christianity is one of the purest of religions, but it's still corrupted. Islam is obviously pure. So transubstantiation is an example of something that's one of those made up things that the human Christians did to take God's real religion, Christianity, and then corrupt it. So we would also have made fun of transubstantiation. It's quite funny. There's another question in the chat I just want to take because it's from an apostate. Saying, thank you, Imtiaz, for the talk and the work you do to help apostates. Any advice on dealing with backlash from family and the religious community when coming out? What has helped you in your own journey? That's a really good question. I think I know who this person is actually, but so yes, you know, one of the biggest forces I have inside of guilt is this thing where I don't want people to come out to their family because of how traumatic it is. But at the same time, I personally I've begun believing that coming out as an apostate is actually the safest thing you can do, if you're in the West, particularly. Because for me, for example, I have a relationship with my family after 7 years now. Like, it's taken a very long time. It's not great, but I kind of have one. It's also normalized it to an extent. So, and my family is super religious. Like, they're not sort of, it's not a joke. Like, they're not sort of practicing for tradition. They're quite politically and Islamically religious. In terms of backlash, there's a few things that I did so I was helping a lot of people tell their families. So I sort of learned a few tricks that then I thought, okay, I'm going to have to apply this to my own situation. And one of them is allies. So the reason I told people at my uni first is because I knew I needed people who were around me that were Muslim, but kind of were okay with me. That's also why I told certain members of my family that I thought maybe would understand, but I mean, they didn't actually, but they were somewhat useful in protecting my mum, because she's quite a vulnerable person when it comes to this kind of stuff. The other thing that kind of helped is, so the big thing that I did was actually get allies. So I would say there's no Muslim family member who really accepted me, but I just started to put the pieces in place so that I told the ones that I thought were most likely not to freak out. The second thing that I did was allies who were not Muslims. So one big thing about humanists that's been super valuable, and this is in the background, you will not know about this, is when an apostate comes to me saying that they need help or whatever, often we'll connect them to local humanist communities. And sometimes it's quite funny because this apostate might be like 20 years old and the humanist community might have an average age of like 60. But actually it works quite interestingly. I've come across a few times where the apostate and the humanists sort of work really nicely, because a lot of humanists are sort of well-to-do, or they've kind of retired or something. They're doing other things. They're chilling out. So for them to be able to like have the apostate come over and feel welcome is quite good for them as well, the humanists as well. And for the apostate, it's the only support structure they have at the time, right? So I saw this happen more than once, where someone would take someone under their wing, and it's really nice to see. So allies is a big one. Often it's people's teachers. So I know there's been a few instances of people who are university students where some professor will or an academic will go out of their way to help that person. If they're younger, if they're at high school or college or whatever, sometimes it's their own teacher, their favorite teacher, right? It happens all the time, and they have a responsibility. So allies are super important. Allies who are Muslim but friendly, and particularly family. If you can find one ally in your family, that often helps. if you can't, or to add to it, also allies who are non-Muslim, they're often quite helpful. They're having allies is really important because it helps you feel less afraid when you are telling your family and to deal with backlash. Because the worst thing is the feeling of not knowing, that darkness, that blackness of not knowing what your next stage of your life is going to look like. But if you've got a few allies, they can give you some advice, and they've, especially with humanists, because a lot of them have lived quite long lives, some of the older ones, so they can sit and be like, look, you'll figure it out, like, and having that support really helps. The second part of the question is what helped me in my own journey. I mean, other than allies, there was also, I kind of went all out. So once that my family knew, I did a Facebook post, like a big long Facebook post, and I sort of did that because I was like, well, fuck it, if we're gonna let everyone know, we're gonna let everyone know. And that kind of weirdly protected me, because the Facebook post had enough non-Muslims on it who were kind of supporting me. Now, there was 2 people I had told from the Islamic Society, one of which she publicly supported me on my Facebook post as a Muslim. And that was super useful, like, because when you have a very Muslim name saying, I support you, whatever you believe is, it helps a lot. It gave me confidence, but it probably also prevented some other people who are going too nasty on my Facebook post. There's a few private messages I got, but so I kind of went all out. The other thing is I made sure I had some stability, and I had no real money at the time. I was really, really poor, but I try to figure out how I can have a roof over my head. I didn't do it as well as I should have done, to be honest, so I got into some trouble. But when I'm helping other apostates, usually one of the great things that we have here is we have a social service system. Like, it really doesn't work, but it really is better than almost anything in the planet, So I always try to connect apostates to those services where I can. Often the services are very bad towards apostates. They don't know how to deal with us. But if the charity is involved, like Faithless, they start to get really careful because they don't want to get a media problem, So another thing is to get Faithless involved. I think they're quite good at stuff like that. And the last thing that helped me actually was to get away from religion entirely. Like, I was obsessed with theology. I still am. I love theology and ancient history and stuff. But I'm just very lucky I didn't get hateful, because people get really angry, and that's re-traumatizing, and it's not really useful. If you imagine, let's say, Viv, you were talking about your background. Let's say you become very Catholic, and you then felt 40 years of your life or 20 years of your life was wasted. You can hold that inside you, and it just doesn't let you move on. And psychologically, it's very re-traumatizing and damaging. So for me, just understanding that, and instead directing myself away from anger and towards this thirst for the world that I had, really helped me as well. I had so many experiences since then, it's really helped me a lot. So I hope that answers your question, AQ. Right. Any more questions? Welcome back, Andrew. You missed where Viv told us he was almost Catholic.
Yes, that was very interesting. And when I was advertising this talk, I thought, well, who should I send it? Which organization should I send it to, apart from just the media and so on? And I thought, well, if I were running any kind of church or mosque or whatever, I'd know that a certain proportion of the people were going to leave the religion. And it would be, well, you could almost say it's your Christian duty to help them. And because, they don't want them to leave. They do their best to sort of persuade them not to. But the leaders of these organizations know that they're going to experience a lot of problems. So I thought, well, I'll send an invitation to them, because no one got back to me. We're quite fortunate in West Sussex that we've got, especially near where I live, there's Crawley, which has got quite a significant Muslim, yeah. And there's also a lesser proportion in Worthing, and I know both of the I know both of the imams, and talked to them and invited them for talks and so on. But I didn't think I'd get a reply, and I was right, I didn't get a reply at all. It may be just because, of course, other things, they're very busy and so on. I don't want to read anything into it. But it strikes me that, religious organizations, they must know that people are leaving. and you'd think that they want to do the best by the people, you know, say, well, we're sorry to see you go, but, you know, if you're having a problem or if you want some help, here's Faith to Faithless.
Unfortunately, I would say religions want the best by the religion. It's within a theocracy, you know, especially a puritanical one, God is above everything else. So it's not really about people. And if the people have lost their way, you want to help them in so much as that they can come back. And so but this is why often good people can do such horrific stuff to their own family. Like, yeah, I'll give you an example. There's one kind of common meme is that within the Jehovah's Witness church, within the ex-Jehovah's Witness communities, every so often you'll get a picture, and it'll be a picture of a letter, and it'll have tears on it and things like that. And it'll usually be a letter from a mother to their own child saying, this is a letter of love. I'm cutting you off because of my love for Jesus and the Mormon church. Sorry, the Jehovah's Witness church, because in the Jehovah's Witness theology, there's the loving provision, which means that if you are in any way in contact with someone who's left actively the Jehovah's Witness church, if you don't cut them off, you become an apostate yourself. So apostasy is quite different from religion to religion. In Jehovah's Witnesses, a lot of the apostates are still religious and they're still Jehovah's Witnesses, but the church will not accept them because they've done something. So they've married the wrong person, they've accepted their child who's a Jehovah's Witness, who's ex-JW or whatever it is. So you know, there's a lot of different mechanisms for control. I think Islam has quite interesting ones because obviously there's what everyone knows about, is the violence, right? But violence is actually not like in the West with ex-Muslims. You don't really hear about ex-Muslims being killed because they've left, for example. Even in the Middle East, where ex-Muslims do leave, and sometimes it's a bit public, but not usually. It's not. It depends on where you're talking about and all that in context. But violence is not the only way of controlling people. Often it's community shunning. So it's, you know, oh my God, I'm going to lose my family. And within a lot of Muslim communities, family is everything, and within the religious context as well. So you're raised up like that, and yet, and so you know that if you leave publicly, you will not have that anymore. And so people, imagine, spend 20 years not telling their families that they've left Islam. They live a complete double lives. They often have husbands or wives, they have children. Maybe the husbands or wives know, or maybe they don't. So what would make someone not tell their loved ones for 20, 30 years that they don't believe, other than that kind of pressure, that pressure of loss? So there's lots and lots of ways of controlling, and religious organizations and communities are fantastic at employing them. And this is why you can get more extreme behaviors. Like what would make someone be willing to kill a bunch of people? What would make someone be willing to cut their child off, if not for these strong mechanisms of control? And I remember, like, whenever I have online, you know, Muslim people come to me and say, but you can leave, like, you know, no, you guys are just, you know, complaining out too loud. What I say to them, they always shut up after I say this. I say, okay, why don't you come out as an ex-Muslim for 2 days or 1 day publicly, see what happens, and then come and tell me that it's easy to leave. And I've never had a single Muslim on the planet do this. And that's because once you do it, you realize, and also they know what's going to happen. They know it already. So they're saying things like, oh, you guys are just complaining and this and that. But the reason they never take me up on my challenge is because they know what would happen. So control is a very, very, very multifaceted thing. And it's a, you know, I'm sure there'll be an academic study about this one day, about kind of the methods of control. Great.
More questions? Come on.
But
There must be lots of more
it's a
questions.
comment. That very point is where so many problems really reside. Because, you know, I mean, you could almost say that the greatest curse of humanity is religion.
I know exactly. Yeah. I know what you're saying. You know, I'm quite, one of the things that I'm quite lucky for is that I got to get into social sciences a little bit earlier. I was very sciencey, but I was never social sciencey. And I studied a little bit of social science. And one of the things you realize about social science is that, like, for example, one can argue that political cultishness can be just as dangerous. You know, the Moonies, I think that was a political cult at one point. You know, it's ideas. Ideas can be quite dangerous when you buy in 100% and you don't allow yourself to question it. And I think this is why humanism is, for me, such a nice inoculator, because being able to apply rationality to things means that you're assuming you're stupid. You know, I assume I'm probably, because I'm an ape brain, I'm evolved to be this way. So I actually don't identify religion as the most dangerous thing. I think that's almost an academic exercise. What's the most harm? Hard to say, but you could definitely argue that anything that makes humans not question themselves and the structures they're in is the most dangerous thing. And that can be political, that can be religious, that can be other forms of brainwashing. You know, you can look at not completely secular, political ideologies that are really dangerous. Certain types of dictatorship, just as dangerous to religion, maybe more, maybe less. You know, so it's interesting because when I talk to apostates, often apostates are kind of the opinion that religion is by far the most dangerous. But again, that's because it's the thing that they know the best, right? It's what I knew the best. But live in communist China and start to see how certain, like, you know, worship of the CCP, it's not a religion, but it's a political cult essentially. You know, I would be just as afraid of that as I am Islamic extremism. So
yeah, I prefer to refer to it as any kind of totalitarian system, and that's what, well, certainly Islam is. I don't suppose, well, I suppose Christianity is as well, but any belief system that explains everything without giving a sensible reason.
Can I ask a question?
yes, Paul.
It always seems to me a bit of a paradox, or is it a contradiction, that the religion, I'm talking about Christianity, has one of its commandments, love thy neighbor as thyself, should be so bloody awful when someone is an apostate or a heretic, that in history, the treatment of people who are heretical or considered heretical has been beastly. And you would have thought this was contradicted by the second and great commandment. What is the psychology? What would you say was the psychology there that helps justify that action against people, rather than engaging with them and sort of loving them or whatever?
Unfortunately, Paul, like, love is a very dangerous thing. Love, I mean, very dangerous, right? And it's dangerous for many, many reasons. Coming back to Jehovah's Witness, and I always come back to them, it's called the loving provision, the fact that you cut your children off. And they have something called love bombing in the temples, where they all kind of come together and come together as a community and love bomb someone. One of our speakers, Terry Sullivan, she's one of our on our board as well. She's a Jehovah's Witness, and she will tell this story about how I can't remember exactly what happened. Our story's on YouTube, but when she was 16, I think, she was excluded by the community, like even her own sister, and her sister had been excluded previously. And so they would all love bomb, but they would leave her in the back of the temple. Like, that is seen as love, because we love her so much, we're going to protect her from herself. You know, so love is I think it's a very dangerous tool that's used.
Isn't the dangerous tool language? That isn't love.
No, I agree, and but the problem is this warped form of love, right? Like parents who love their children so much that they would harm them so that the child comes back and under their control. You know, it's that kind of stuff. I think on the flip side, I also agree with you. It's always shocked me that, you know, love doesn't shine through more, and it does actually. So, and I'll explain what I mean by that. Often when ex-Muslims tell me, oh no, but, you know, I'm afraid to lose my mom or my dad with this. While I can imagine that they get beat and there's a lot of violence that can come with this, and they might even be made homeless, one of the things I always say is, do your family love you? And I'll tell you why I ask them that question. Because sometimes there's a mom or a dad just doesn't love the kid. And I've seen it happen, and it's one of the hardest things to see, you know, when you really see coldness in a family, because it ruins a child in a way that you can't easily resolve. Years of therapy and you still have this gap. Then you've got families where you've got, this person's come back. Then you've got the families where there is, love, but there's just abuse. So there's love and the families are abusive because of control or whatever it is. Those are much more repairable, because with those situations, as long as the apostate sort of builds some boundaries and creates some, over time, families often, the love often forces them together. Like, it's like my mom will not be able to cut me off, like, especially anymore. Like, she just can't. She's always been quite a loving mom. We've had lots of issues growing up, of course, but like, she does love me. And that is the one savior thing that I had, that I have a mom that's loved me. And it's the one thing that's allowed us to build any kind of relationship. It's not great, but it's there. So love is a very double-edged sword. I like to use, like, religions use love to try to create a wedge. I think similarly, apostates can use love to try to heal, because a lot of apostates run away and they don't want nothing to do with their previous community and family and stuff like that. But actually, sometimes you can use that to your advantage. You can go back, you can force it, you can show people kindness and love and show people that you're the same person. You're just an atheist or whatever, right? A humanist. And it does mend things. Like I'm still considered an absolute, like, don't talk to him kind of person, but I'm at every wedding I can go to. I'm always interacting with Muslims from my background, because they are my community, right? They are what I grew up in, and a lot of them, I think, can see that. A lot of those people can see that, and it's very confusing for them, but that's not my battle to resolve. That's their battle to resolve, right? What I can do is try to always be there, try to always interact with the people that I've always loved growing up, and that's what I can do. And it works. It really, really works. Like, the constant number of stories I have of people who had almost irreparable situations where love is the only reason their families are still together. It is really powerful. I know of one girl from Saudi Arabia. She ran away. She's in asylum. She got asylum here in the UK. Her dad tried to kill her, and her dad almost stopped her from leaving the country. Like, it was a whole Mission Impossible situation. She now talks to her family pretty much every day. And okay, she doesn't talk to the dad very much. He's an absolute psychopath, but the mom and her talk to her. And her mom was going to visit her in London. And even me, and I was like, oh, are you sure that's safe? But it's the point where they've gotten to where that's doable, right? So, and that's from Saudi Arabia, where there's many, many layers of issues with that. And love has won in that situation, I would say. And, she will never go to Saudi Arabia. Of course, she can't. But the mom can visit her here, and she even is not afraid of being killed by her dad, which I know is a big statement, but her dad was going to kill her, right? And her dad regrets it now, but he will never say that because he's a psychopath. Does that make sense? I hope that kind of covers. I've got another question here from the one I think open apostate on this. Another question: what has helped you survive and protect your well-being while being in the closet? That's a very good question. Okay, this is something I tell people who are all in this situation. It's what I did. You have a 2-year plan or a 1-year, or like when you're going to leave, like when you're going to get away plan, and then you assume you're going to have to break that plan in a month or a week, because that's what happened to everyone. So it happened to me. I was planning to leave at time X, and my brain just couldn't take it, and I had to come out by accident, basically. And it happens to everyone. So I always have, like, what's your financial plan? Who are you going to live with, right? Like, whose house you're going to live with, who's going to put a roof over your head if something goes wrong. If you have physical safety danger, then one of the biggest things is, again, allies, because allies will know that you're safe or unsafe. A bit like when I met that person in that cafe, I told my friend that, hey, can you help me? Reaching out for help can help a lot, because, ex-Muslims, we're kind of very alone. So we don't like to, apostates in general, we're very alone. We don't like to get help. Right? We don't trust anyone. That's a big thing. We don't really trust people. But sometimes it's important to trust people where you can, because they can often come out in a way that you wouldn't expect. I remember, so Jehovah's Witnesses have that trust problem the most. I remember there was an audience and we were 5 panelists of Jehovah's Witnesses and me, ex-Jehovah's Witnesses. And one guy stood up, he had just come out 3 months ago as not really believing. And he said, you know, I'm ex-Jehovah's Witness now, but how can I live? Because there's no one in this audience I would trust. Because I used to trust Jehovah's Witnesses, but now I don't trust them, of course. And we're taught not to trust outsiders. How do I ever build trust? He's now happily married. He's a gay guy to a guy who's not Jehovah's Witness or from that background. So clearly he's learned something somewhere. But I think sometimes trusting outsiders really helps. Another thing for survival for me was financial. So I learned to work any shitty job even when I was Muslim, just to like learn, because especially men in, like, obviously women are treated quite badly, but men are actually hobbled in a certain specific way. We're not really taught how to take care of ourselves. So like, I didn't know how to do anything. We're taught that we have to work, but that's after university and stuff. That's later. So I thought like, no, I'm going to work. So I kind of learned how to, I got like the worst job you can imagine. Like, it was just the worst jobs, like all either minimum wage or under, so I could save money. And my mom was a bit like, what are you doing this for? La, la, la. But I just knew I had to save some money, and I had a tiny bit of money from that, and that really helped. So like, unfortunately, apostates, to answer your question, AQ, like apostates have to really learn to save money for themselves and just put a roof over your head. Yeah, I'm trying to think what the last thing, survive and protect my well-being. The last thing is mental. I think me coming out early helped a lot. If I had come out later, like now, if I decided now is the time, you know, I would have done more damage to myself in the last 7 years, because our mental well-being isn't all there usually. And I think the other thing is doing things that are not to do with apostasy or ex-Muslim or anything. So like, I did salsa, I did improv drama, I did like lots of other things. And that really helped me learn how to like interact with people who are not from my background, and, you know, have loves that were beyond the obsession that I had for Islam. That really helped. And the mental health stuff you don't see immediately or even in the short term, but being able to kind of control your anxiety means you make better decisions when something goes wrong. And so that was really useful. I also was really paranoid. Because in Islam, like with our communities, they tell us you're going to become a prostitute and a drug dealer. Like, the assumption was I'm going to be on the street, like shooting up heroin, you know? So I was so terrified of that. I did absolutely the opposite. So I didn't become like, so I didn't drink for a long time. Even to this day, Andrew Copson will always joke that I'm like the Muslim one, because I don't drink almost at all. Like, I drink a little bit, but not really. I was really paranoid for a long time about going down like the wrong path. So just to answer your question, I think a bit of paranoia does help, because you will meet people who are great and kind, who can help you explore these things, but just be a little bit careful of them in the beginning, because we're not really taught how to drink responsibly. It was a bad problem in ex-Muslim parties, actually, where people would get smashed drunk because they didn't know how to control it, to the point where I just started banning alcohol. I was just like, no more alcohol in my house when I did parties at my house. So yeah. Any more questions? If not,
I've got a question about the just one last question. There's a whole spectrum of Islamic groups in the UK. A lot of people don't know that. There's a wonderful book I read about it, and from conservative groups to very progressive groups, although the progressives are very small in number. So would you say if it was a progressive Muslim group, would they be more open to people leaving? I mean, it would seem obvious, but is that true?
yeah, good question. And Marion, I don't know if I'm saying your name right. You had a question as well?
Yeah, I was going on more something different, completely different. So,
Sure.
Yeah.
Why don't you go for it, and I'll try to do both.
A few things that come up. You obviously started a question. I think a lot of people do when they leave home and they go to university. That's the time when we start thinking. You know, certainly when I started questioning things about my upbringing, very Christian upbringing. And yeah, your mind expands, you're meeting people from lots of different backgrounds, and so that's when you start questioning things. And I think that probably makes it easier because you've already left home, so it makes it easier to move away from religion. But I was just wondering about, well, you mentioned the extreme of that lady who's in Saudi Arabia, had to sort of flee Saudi Arabia because her father had death threats, and I know that is the extreme, but you know, there's a lot of control and there are some threats on that. Is there anything like safe houses for people who maybe they haven't left their family? So how do you, if you're not going to go to university, if you're not going to remove yourself from that situation and maybe find friends who can help you, are there things like that, like for example refuge for women who are fleeing domestic violence? Are there certain things or not?
Yeah, great, fantastic question. I think I'll be able to answer both actually in one go. There were so there's nothing such as a safe house. Actually, if you're in the UK and you're a woman, things are a little bit easier because there's a whole history of feminism pushing charities. So if you're an ex-Muslim girl, I know where to send you. I know exactly where to go.
Okay.
If you're a gay ex-Muslim guy, I know where to send you. If you're a straight ex-Muslim guy, I have no idea what to do with you. This has happened. There was one guy I knew who actually ended up in a gay safe house, acting like he was gay because he couldn't get a place. Of course, the issues are much more common when you're a girl. So, you know, here and there. But there are safe houses for women, and I mean, just the government has, you know, if you're homeless, there are places that are horrendous to be in. I've been in some of these, but like, you know, they're still, I don't know if they're safe though. So I'll give you an example. There's two Saudi girls. They had escaped. They're doing really, really well now. This is some of the, when I said I was paranoid when I was leaving Islam, these two girls, the older sister is the most paranoid person I've ever come across. She's like a real movie character. Like if you ever met her, she's doing incredibly well right now. But I remember when they had been, I was the only person in the entire country that knew who they were, and other than the Home Office. And they were in a government sort of homeless shelter type place. And they were like, Imtiaz, we can't stay here. There's these people who are refugees or Afghani men next door, and we're really worried for our safety. So unfortunately, safe houses tend to focus on vulnerable communities, which often can include religious Muslim communities. So they're not always safe. There's been a few instances where I've kind of gone to like friends or something. I have to be very careful because of safeguarding, but like there's one guy, my friend took him in for 3 months. He lived in a separate annex of his house. My friend's quite wealthy. There's another instance where there was a girl that these humanists sort of took in. They didn't house her, but they just sort of, they were very close to her and all that. She's a great humanist, the person who helped her. But the good thing with this stuff is that there's often other charities you can go to and you can kind of slip in. There's nothing for apostates. I think we desperately need it. And I think one of the best things that's happening in 2022 is we are going to have, I don't know if I'm supposed to say this actually. So I'll put my Faithless hat on and not my Humanist UK trustee. This is not from that information. This is from Faithless. There's going to be a apostate hotline and it will be the world first. So it'll be, you can call up, get advice, people who are apostates themselves taking it on. I used to send people to Karma Nirvana, which is a charity for women who are from Asian background usually, or Iranian, who are facing honor violence and forced marriage. We used to send them to them. They were fantastic. They've saved so many of our cases, but we need something for ourselves, right? Especially because, you can't, if you're a white girl, Karma Nirvana is not really built to help you because you're not facing honor violence in the same exact way, right? Or if you're a man and you're gay, that's not what they deal with. So we need our own, and I think that's happening. I would love there to be proper safe houses, but one of the challenges about putting Faithless into Humanists UK is that it's also bureaucratic, and that's for the right reasons. It means that it can be done properly, right? So safe houses are fine when they're informal, but when they're not, they're extremely difficult to manage because of safeguarding issues. So we've sort of looked at it. It's just very difficult, basically. There are other charities that kind of do things like this as well, but so we can try that kind of stuff. But yeah, just on that, yeah. So I'd love someone to get really wealthy and sort of donate a bunch of money. But I think apostates, one of the things that's happening is that there's more and more apostates who are coming out of the woodwork. There's more successful apostates as well. Like one of the richest people in America at the moment is a billionaire who's an ex-Mormon. He just came out as ex-Mormon last week, and he's giving away 90% of his fortune. None of it will go to the Mormon church. And they like to take 10%, as you know. So, you know, we just need a couple of successful people, a couple of charities to be aware. And, you know, I think things are changing. With people who live outside of the UK or Australia or these kind of countries, honestly, there just isn't a solution. I often have people come to me like that, like, hey, what can we do? Or, you know, they want to get away or whatever. And it's very easy to try to give hope to people. But the truth is, if you're stuck in Egypt, and there's 2 girls at the moment who I know, they're lesbian lovers, they're stuck in Egypt. They've come to me and a few other people. Now, other people have said to them, oh yeah, let's try to help you. Blah, 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 blah. But the truth of the matter is they're stuck in Egypt under the Muslim Brotherhood, which is extremely anti-LGBT, that are apostates, and they have no money left. Right? So they've managed to get a bit of money through some of our contacts, but what are we really going to do for these people, right? And so I really try not to give too much hope when it's not fair to do that. I think we're so lucky here that we have a state and we've got tax, and we have the ability to, and we have a secular government largely, or a secular construction. So this is where I try to help people to start with. Eventually we need to try to do more, but I mean, you know, it's bad enough here. So yeah. On the progressive Muslim question, I always get flack because I've seen often as a very pro-Muslim ex-Muslim, weirdly enough. I don't know why. So I've been let down by a lot of progressive type Muslims or moderate Muslims because they're religious people still, and there's an incentive for them to keep, because in their minds, I'm still wrong. But they just understand why I've left, because I've run away from all the crazy extremists, right? So we understand why you've left, but you've got to come back to this, obviously, because this is right, you know? So how can you ever really trust that? Now, the good thing with a lot of progressive people is that they're also humans. So there's a lot of humans who just are loving, kind people, and some of them are progressives, and when they are, they're fantastic. There's the New Horizon, which is run by a couple of progressive people. I spoke at their conference. I was the first ex-Muslim to ever speak at any kind of Muslim conference, and it was very well received, and the video is still up and Muslims have watched it. Now, those progressives are the really weird ones, because they're quiet progressive, like genuinely progressive, in the sense that they follow what they say, right? Which is that people should have a choice to join or leave Islam. So they actively went out of their way to try to help, for example, me speak about it. And that's weird. That's not very common. Largely progressives are complicated because it's very much dependent on the person or the institution. For example, the Church of England, one could argue that if you compare it to other Christian groups, they're progressive, but would they help apostates? Hell no. You know, so I consider them not progressive. I think a lot of Muslims who are seen as moderate or progressive are not really. They're actually somewhat extreme, but they're just extreme in a different way. True progressive people, I think, put people in front of dogma, and that's a very uncommon thing. That's uncommon for humanists and secularists. It's not like, you know, we're just humans and we're the same, you know, so all human beings are a little bit like this, but yeah. So I would say I'm a bit skeptical of progressives. I'm only not skeptical of progressives when they lead by action. And I think the action is if they show kindness towards apostates, and true kindness towards apostate is true acceptance. It's I accept you, even though I don't agree with your opinion. I accept you because you need to be protected. And, you know, the more I read about what was happening during the Holocaust and the Underground Railroads, the more I think humans have a way to show their true insides when there's no reason for them to help a group, but they do it anyways. You know, and when you read stories about the Underground Railroad and you hear about all these people who helped people they didn't need to help, or that's when you really think, okay, these are real progressive people, right? So with religious people, it's the same. When there's something on the line and they put our humanity in front, then I'm like, yeah, that's someone I can work with. And that doesn't mean that they're not extremists. I've met people who are quite extreme in their religion. I mean, pretty extreme Islamically, but they're kind. And for me, they can be more progressive sometimes than a progressive person who's more loose or lax in their religion, but will not go out of their way, or will not really follow their own actions with the things that they're saying, if that makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's a great reply.
Yeah, it's just something it's unfortunately something I've learned through people screwing you around a little bit, or alternatively really going out their way to do kindness. You know, both things are true. And I think I've just lived a very long life in a very short amount of time in the last 10, 20 years. So I've got one last question actually from the one apostate. Well, actually there's other apostates on this now, I know. But I've got one more question. If I'll take her question, I actually know who this person is. I'll tell you the story later, Andrew, but it's really hilarious that they're listening to this, the context of them listening to this. But do you think coming out as an apostate is necessary, even in cases where you're able to live your life freely and safely as an apostate? I think absolutely. And I've changed my mind on this. I used to say to people, but it's your choice, but I actually just think it's absolutely true. And the reason for that is you're never actually free and safe if you're in the closet, never. Because I'll give you an example. If you're like me, if I never came out in the UK as an apostate, and let's say I could have lived my life and I could be free and safe, I'm still not, because the world is still dangerous for atheists, let alone apostates. The world is physically quite dangerous. If all of you guys went to certain countries and you were open as atheist, some of you would be in danger, right? And I think, you know, unfortunately, it's never nice to say to people, look, the world is a bit on your shoulders, but it kind of is. The world is only a consequence of actions we take. And I've made a lot of very, very horrible decisions, and I've hurt a lot of people, but at the end of the day, like, we just have to be recognizing that these things happen because we make them happen and we allow them to happen. So for me, I do think we have to come out. I do think it's surprising how much safer you are if you're out within the context of the West, because too many eyes are then on you, you know, and if there's not enough eyes on you, then sometimes families think they can get away with certain things. So for me, sometimes when people give me that question, I say, look, if you're worried of honor violence, that's a two-edged sword for the family, because if they honor kill you and everyone knows that you were an apostate up front, then they will also dishonor themselves potentially. And this is something, it's a bit warped logic, but it does actually happen sometimes. Sometimes when people are very open, the families just want to shush everything and make everything go back to normal. So, you know, you can use these things sometimes in your favor, but you're never safe as an apostate. We're just not safe as an apostate. We're not free. We have to keep doing this. We're a lot freer and safer than we were 8 years ago if you're an ex-Muslim, but it's still not there yet. And this is why Faithless is training these institutions. You know, like, we train them, because you train institutions, you train the people who provide services. And often the first thing they say is, oh, I didn't know this was a thing. And then and these are social workers, they start thinking, wait a minute, there was that one girl that I used to deal with. Ah, yeah, I do know a story like this. So one of the things that we do in the training was we help them realize they know this problem. They just didn't recognize the scale of it. Yeah. Hope that was a useful talk. Thanks for the questions. I didn't expect that there would be this many apostates actually on the talk, so as well.